The alien professor recoiled in horror as Russell Jenkins, his new human student, regaled the class with blood-chilling tales of surviving on the infamous Deathworld Earth. Russell's gruff demeanor and battle-scarred visage stood in stark contrast to the lithe insectoid forms of his Wadi classmates in the prestigious Galactic Academy on planet Zephyria. At 48 years old, Russell was an unwilling participant in the Academy's exchange program, a desperate attempt by the Galactic Council to foster understanding between humans and the Wadi and prevent the brewing tensions from erupting into a catastrophic interspecies war. The Council hoped that cultural exchange could bridge the yawning chasm between the two races, but Russell had seen too much during his harrowing tours of duty to believe in such idealistic notions. As he strode into the gleaming halls, heavy combat boots thudding against the polished floors, Russell drew stares of unease and fascination from the shimmering carapaces of the Wadi students. In comparative xenobiology, Professor Umbra's compound eyes widened as Russell snorted derisively at the mention of Deathworlds. "Lady, I was born on a Deathworld, it's called Earth, and it makes your little charts look like a walk in the park," Russell growled. The room erupted into excited chatter, antennae twitching in disbelief. But beneath his gruff exterior, Russell understood the gravity of his mission. As the first human to attend the prestigious academy, the fate of billions rested on his shoulders. One misstep could shatter the fragile peace and plunge the galaxy into the bloodiest war it had ever seen. Russell had to succeed in this exchange. The alternative was too horrific to contemplate. In the days following Russell's explosive entrance into the comparative xenobiology class, the battle-scarred human found himself swarmed by wide-eyed Wadi students at every turn. They trailed after him in the gleaming halls, peppering him with endless questions about Earth and the trials of life on a Class 5 Deathworld. "Is it true that your oceans are filled with venomous creatures that can kill with a single sting?" A small green carapaced Wadi asked, her antennae quivering with a mix of fear and fascination. "And the earthquakes. How do you even build cities with the ground constantly shaking beneath your feet?" Another chimed in, his compound eyes wide. Russell sighed, the constant barrage of questions wearing on his already frayed nerves. He was a soldier, not a damn tour guide. Professor Umbra pulled him aside after a particularly grueling day of fending off curious students. "Russell, I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you have to understand," she said, her voice gentle. "Most Wadi have never encountered a being from a Class 5 Deathworld before. They're usually deemed too dangerous for interaction." Russell snorted. "Too dangerous, lady? You haven't seen dangerous until you've stared down a Category 5 hurricane with nothing but a prayer and a poncho." Umbra's antennae twitched. "That's exactly my point. Your experiences, as harrowing as they may be, could help bridge the gap between our species, help them understand what it truly means to be human." Russell ran a hand down his face, feeling the weight of every scar, every sleepless night spent reliving the horrors he'd witnessed. "Fine," he said at last. "I'll do your little show and tell. But don't expect me to sugarcoat it." And so Russell found himself standing before a sea of eager Wadi faces in the Academy's grand auditorium, the stage lights glinting off their iridescent exoskeletons. He took a deep breath, the air shuddering in his lungs. "You want to know about life on a Deathworld? Well, buckle up, buttercups, you're in for a ride." He started with the earthquakes, describing the bone-rattling terror of feeling the very earth beneath your feet rebel and heave. The Wadi students gasped as he recounted narrowly escaping a collapsing building, the concrete crumbling mere inches from his heels. Next came the megafauna, the enormous predators that stalked the wildernesses of Earth. Imagine a creature the size of your auditorium, with teeth as long as your arm and a hunger that can never be sated, Russell said, his voice low and grim. "That's a megalodon, the apex predator of the seas. And trust me, you don't want to meet one on a bad day." The Wadi were enraptured, their antennae quivering with each harrowing tale. But Russell was just getting started. He spoke of his early years on Earth, scraping out a meager existence in the rubble of a post-apocalyptic cityscape, of scavenging for food in the blasted ruins, always one step ahead of the raider gangs that prowled the streets. "You don't know hunger until you've gone days without a proper meal, your stomach twisting itself into knots," he said, his voice rough with remembered pain. "You don't know desperation until you've bartered your last clean water for a scrap of stale bread." The auditorium was utterly silent, the Wadi barely daring to breathe. Russell forged ahead, the words pouring out of him like blood from an open wound. "And then there was Yellowstone. My first real mission as a UNEC peacekeeper. We knew the supervolcano was close to erupting, but nothing could have prepared us for the reality of it." He described the searing heat, the choking ash that blotted out the sun and turned day into night, the panicked screams of civilians as they fled the advancing wall of destruction, the peacekeepers fighting through the chaos to evacuate as many as they could. "I can still feel the ash in my lungs, taste it on my tongue," Russell said, his eyes distant. "It was like breathing in fire with every step, but we couldn't stop. Too many lives on the line." As he spoke, the Wadi began to see past the gruff exterior, to the weariness and pain that etched itself into every line of Russell's face, the scars that mapped a lifetime of unimaginable trials. When at last he fell silent, the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause, the Wadi leaping to their feet, all save one. Xiphus, a burly Wadi with the chips on his shoulder, remained seated, his arms crossed. "Surely nothing could survive all that and remain sane," Xiphus scoffed. "You're not a real Deathworlder, you're just boasting." The room fell silent once more as Russell turned his gaze on the young Wadi, a gaze that had seen the very worst the universe had to offer and come out the other side. "Kid, spend a week in my head and you'll be begging to get out," Russell said, his voice deathly quiet. "I ain't asking for your belief or your pity. This is just the way it is." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the auditorium, leaving a stunned audience in his wake. The Wadi looked at one another, their perceptions of the human irreversibly shaken. The emergency klaxons jolted Russell awake from a fitful slumber, the blood-red light strobing through the academy's gleaming halls. He leapt out of bed, his battle-honed instincts kicking into high gear as he checked his comms. "Code red. All rescue personnel report to the hangar immediately for deployment. This is not a drill." Russell was already out the door before the announcement finished, his exosuit whirring to life as it encased his body. In the hangar, organized chaos reigned as the Wadi engineering students scrambled to prep their rescue gear. Xiphus, his carapace still scuffed from the previous day's training, caught Russell's eye and nodded grimly. "What's the situation?" Russell barked, his voice cutting through the din. "Massive quake hit the Zephyrian settlement. Half the structures are down, unknown number of civilians trapped," a Wadi instructor reported, her compound eyes wide with fear. "We need all hands on deck." Russell stepped forward, his stance resolute. "I'll take point. I've run more disaster ops than I care to count." The Wadi rescuers bristled, their antennae twitching with unease at the thought of following a human's lead. But as Russell began barking orders, his voice steady and assured, they fell in line. There was no time for pride, not with lives on the line. The flight to the settlement was a blur, the transport's engines screaming as it tore through the Zephyrian sky. Russell stared out the viewport, his jaw clenched tight. He'd seen destruction before, more times than any sane man should. But it never got easier. As they touched down, the full scale of the devastation hit him like a punch to the gut. Buildings lay crumpled like discarded toys, the air thick with the cries of the wounded and the dying. For a moment, Russell was back on Earth, the acrid tang of smoke and blood filling his nostrils. He shook himself, forcing the memories back into their box. There was work to do. "Xiphus, take your team and start clearing the rubble on the east side. Prioritize any life signs," Russell ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll take the west. Stay sharp and watch for aftershocks." The Wadi nodded, their trepidation forgotten in the face of Russell's calm authority. They fanned out, their advanced scanners probing the ruins for signs of life. Russell plunged into the fray, his exosuit enhancing his strength as he heaved aside massive slabs of rubble. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the grit and grime. But he pushed on. He'd endured worse. He'd survived worse. Hours blurred together as they worked, the sun beating down mercilessly overhead. Russell's suit pinged warnings about his elevated heart rate, his dangerously low hydration levels, but he ignored them. He could rest when the job was done. He was shoring up a crumbling wall, his suit's hydraulics groaning with the strain when he heard it. A weak, muffled cry, barely audible over the crunch of shifting rubble. "Xiphus," he yelled into his comms. "I've got a live one. Converge on my position." He scrabbled at the rubble, his fingers bleeding as he tore through the jagged edges. There, buried in a tiny pocket of air, lay a young wadi child, her carapace cracked and leaking viscous green fluid. "Hold on, kid," Russell murmured, his voice gentle. "We're going to get you out of here." Xiphus appeared at his side, his own exosuit battered and streaked with grime. Together they began to carefully extract the child, working with a desperate urgency. They were so focused on their task that they almost missed the deep, ominous rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. Russell's head snapped up, his eyes widening with dread. "Aftershock, brace yourselves." The world exploded into chaos as the ground heaved and bucked like a living thing. A massive slab of concrete, easily the size of a transport, broke free from the wall above them, hurtling down with terrifying speed. Russell moved without thinking, years of training and hard-won instinct taking over. He shoved Xiphus clear, the wadi stumbling back with the child clutched tight to his chest, and then Russell was bracing himself beneath the slab, his exosuit screaming with the strain as he bore the impossible weight. "Russell!" Xiphus cried out, his voice raw with fear. But Russell just gritted his teeth, every muscle in his body trembling with the effort. "Get the kid clear," he ground out, his words barely audible over the shriek of tortured metal. Xiphus hesitated for a split second, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. Then he was moving, scrambling clear of the rubble with the child held close. Russell held on for an eternity, his vision tunneling to a single point of focus. Just a little longer, just a little more. His suit's alarms blared, red warning lights flashing across his HUD, and then, with a final, tortured groan, the hydraulics gave out. The slab crashed down like the fist of an angry god, driving Russell to his knees. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and all-consuming. He tasted blood, felt bones shift and crack. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. Dimly through the ringing in his ears, he heard Xiphus shouting his name. He felt the weight of the slab lift, felt strong wadi hands grip his arms and haul him clear of the rubble. He blinked up at the sky, his vision hazy and unfocused. Xiphus's face swam into view, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Russell, are you all right? How did you—" Russell coughed, wincing at the stabbing pain in his ribs. He forced a grin, feeling the blood trickle down his chin. "Ain't my first rodeo, kid," he rasped. "Now let's get back to work. We got lives to save." Xiphus stared at him for a long moment, something like respect kindling in his compound eyes. Then he nodded, helping Russell to his feet. In the aftermath of the quake, Russell's heroic deeds during the rescue operation spread like wildfire across Zephyria. Holovids of him braced beneath the massive concrete slab, his exosuit sparking and straining, flooded the airwaves. The wadi spoke his name with a mix of awe and reverence, this human who had risked everything to save one of their own. The Wadi High Council extended an invitation for Russell to attend a grand ceremony in his honor, to formally recognize his bravery. But Russell balked at the idea, his skin crawling at the thought of standing on a stage, all eyes upon him. "I don't do what I do for glory or recognition," he grumbled to Xiphus one evening, as they pored over star charts in the Academy's dimly lit astrolab. "I do it because it's the right thing to do, because someone has to." Xiphus looked up from the glowing display, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic stars. "I understand, Russell, but you have to know that what you did out there, it means something to my people. You showed them the best of humanity." Russell shook his head, turning back to the charts. I'm just one man, Xiphus. And right now this man needs to focus on his studies if he's going to make it through this term. As the weeks passed, Russell threw himself into his coursework with single-minded determination. The Wadi curriculum was unlike anything he'd encountered on Earth, a dizzying blend of advanced theoretical physics, xenobiology, and interstellar diplomacy. But Russell was nothing if not a quick study, and he found an unexpected ally in Xiphus. The two spent long hours in the lab, running simulations and debating the finer points of warp field mechanics. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be taking study tips from a Wadi, Russell joked one evening, as they hunched over a particularly thorny set of equations. Xiphus let out a buzzing chuckle, his antennae twitching with amusement. And I never thought I'd be learning about Earth's history from a living, breathing human. They traded stories as they worked, Russell painting a picture of Earth that was at once beautiful and terrifying, a world of soaring mountains and roiling seas, of great cities and sprawling wildernesses. In turn, Xiphus spoke of the pressures of growing up in a renowned Wadi academic clan, of the weight of expectation that rested upon his carapace. Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating beneath it all, he confessed, his voice low, like I'll never be good enough no matter how hard I try. Russell laid a hand on Xiphus's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. I know a thing or two about impossible expectations, he said, his eyes distant. You just got to remember that at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with your choices. Not your clan, not the High Council, you. Xiphus blinked, something like understanding dawning in his gaze. How do you do it, Russell? How do you carry the weight of all you've seen, all you've done, and still keep going? Russell was silent for a long moment, his face etched with old pain. You just do, he said at last, because the alternative is unthinkable. You put one foot in front of the other, and you keep moving forward. It's the only way. Their moment of introspection was shattered by a blaring alarm from the comm console. Xiphus leapt to his feet, his claws flying over the controls. It's a distress call, he reported, his voice tight with tension. From a Wadi research vessel in the Kappa Zeta system. They were studying an anomaly, some kind of unstable wormhole when something went wrong. They're adrift and in danger of being pulled in. Russell was already moving, his eyes hard with determination. How long until the nearest Wadi rescue ship can reach them? Xiphus shook his head, his expression grim. Too long, they'll be torn apart by the gravitational shear long before help arrives. Russell nodded, his jaw set. Then it's up to us. We'll take one of the Academy's fast couriers, something with a warp drive. It's risky, but it's their only chance. Xiphus hesitated for only a moment, the weight of the decision heavy upon him. Then he squared his shoulders, his compound eyes glinting with resolve. Let's do it. The hangar was deserted as they raced across the tarmac, the hulking shapes of the Academy's ships looming in the darkness. Russell led the way to a sleek, dart-like vessel, its hull emblazoned with the Academy's crest. This is the ACS Zephyr, he said, his voice tight with tension as they strapped in. Experimental warp drive, designed for speed and maneuverability. She'll get us there, but it's going to be a bumpy ride. Xiphus nodded, his claws flying over the nav console. Coordinates locked in, ready when you are. Russell took a deep breath, his hands steady on the controls. Punch it! The Zephyr leapt forward, the stars blurring into streaks of light as they hurtled through the void. Russell gritted his teeth against the crushing force of acceleration, his eyes locked on the readouts. They dropped out of warp on the edge of the Kappa Zeta system, the distress beacon pulsing like a wounded animal. And there, silhouetted against the swirling maelstrom of the wormhole, was the stricken research vessel. It was a wreck, its hull buckled and torn, escape pods jettisoned. Debris spun lazily in the void, glittering in the harsh light of the anomaly. We're too late, Xiphus whispered, his voice heavy with dread. But Russell was already in motion, his fingers flying over the controls. Not yet, we're not. I'm taking us in. The Zephyr shuddered as Russell brought them alongside the crippled vessel, the wormhole's gravitational pull tugging at their hull. In the airlock, Russell donned a battered EVA suit, its seals hissing as he checked the connections. "Russell, this is insane," Xiphus pleaded over the comm. "That anomaly could rip you apart." Russell just shook his head, his face grim behind the helmet's visor. "Xiphus, if we don't do this, those Wadi are dead. I'm the only one with EVA experience. It has to be me." With that, he cycled the airlock and stepped out into the void. The wormhole loomed before him, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to pull at his very soul. Russell forced himself to turn away, to focus on the task at hand. The research vessel's hull was pitted and scarred, its metal skin warped by the anomaly's incredible forces. Russell maglocked his boots and began to make his way towards the airlock, a tether line spooling out behind him. It was slow going, each step an effort against the wormhole's inexorable pull. Debris hurtled past, some chunks as large as a man, and Russell had to dodge and weave to avoid being pulverized. At last he reached the airlock, his gloved hands shaking as he fumbled with the manual release. The door opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, revealing a scene of utter devastation within. Bodies floated in the zero-G, their faces frozen in masks of terror. Consoles sparked and smoked, the acrid scent of burning insulation filling the air. And there, huddled in a corner, were the survivors. 3 Wadi, their carapaces cracked and leaking, their compound eyes wide with fear. "It's all right," Russell said, his voice steady over the comm. "I'm here to get you out." One by one, he helped the Wadi into emergency EVA suits, their claws trembling as they sealed the helmets. Then, with the survivors tethered to his suit, Russell began the perilous journey back to the Zephyr. The wormhole seemed to sense their attempt to escape, its pull growing stronger with each passing moment. Russell's suit groaned with the strain, warning lights flashing across his HUD. But he pushed on, his jaw clenched with determination. He could feel the anomaly's hunger, its desire to consume them, to rip them apart, atom by atom. But he would not let it win. Not today. At last, they reached the Zephyr's airlock, Xiphus's anxious face peering out at them from behind the viewport. Russell all but threw the survivors inside, his muscles screaming with the effort. And then he was tumbling in after them, the airlock slamming shut behind him. The Zephyr's engines roared to life, the inertial dampeners straining as Xiphus threw them into full reverse. For a moment, it seemed as if the wormhole would not release them. Its gravitational claws sunk deep into their hull. But then, with a final, shuddering wrench, they broke free, the stars once again streaking past the viewports. In the airlock, Russell collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Xiphus was at his side in an instant, his claws gentle as he helped the human to his feet. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," the Wadi said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved them, Russell. You saved us all." Russell managed a weak grin, his face pale behind the visor. "All in a day's work, kid. All in a day's work." As the Zephyr limped back to Zephyria, its hull scarred and battered but its crew alive, Xiphus couldn't help but marvel at the human beside him. Russell Jenkins, the Deathworlder, the survivor. A man forged in the crucible of a hostile universe, his spirit unbreakable, his courage without limit. And Xiphus knew with a sudden, unshakable certainty that there was no one else he would rather have at his side in the face of the unknown. For Russell had shown him the true meaning of strength, of resilience in the face of impossible odds. The Wadi looked to the stars, his compound eyes glinting with newfound determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers lurked in the vast expanse of space, they would face them together. The human and the Wadi, united in purpose and unbreakable in spirit. As the Zephyr touched down on Zephyria to a hero's welcome, Russell and Xiphus found themselves swept up in a whirlwind of celebration and praise. The Wadi High Council lauded their bravery, while the Academy hailed them as shining examples of interspecies cooperation. But even as they basked in the glow of their triumph, an urgent message from Earth shattered the festive atmosphere. Russell's eyes widened as he read the communiqué, his face draining of color. A massive Wadi invasion fleet had breached the Sol system's defenses, and Earth's forces were buckling under the onslaught. The UNEC was recalling all active duty personnel, and Russell was to report immediately. Xiphus found Russell in his quarters, hastily packing his meager belongings. The human's movements were sharp and efficient, his jaw set with grim determination. "Russell, what's happening?" Xiphus asked, his voice tight with concern. Russell didn't look up, his hands never stopping their work. "Earth's under attack. Wadi fleet, I've been recalled." Xiphus reeled back, his compound eyes widening in shock. "What? But that's impossible. My people would never—" Russell cut him off with a sharp look. "Apparently, they would." Xiphus shook his head, his mind racing. "Let me come with you. I can help. I can talk to them. Make them see reason." Russell zipped up his pack with a harsh tug, slinging it over his shoulder. "No, this isn't your fight, Xiphus. You need to stay here, protect your own people. There's no telling how far this will go." Xiphus stepped forward, his claws clenching. "Earth is my home too, Russell. You showed me that. Let me stand with you as you stood with us." For a long moment, Russell just stared at him, his eyes hard and unreadable. Then slowly, he reached into his pack and pulled out a battered combat knife, its handle worn smooth with years of use. "This was my first blade," Russell said, his voice rough with emotion. "Carried it with me through every battle, every mission. It's never let me down." He pressed the knife into Xiphus's claws, folding the Wadi's fingers around the handle. "Keep it safe for me until I get back." Xiphus looked down at the knife, then back up at Russell, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I will, I promise." Russell nodded, his face softening for just a moment. Then he was pulling Xiphus into a gruff embrace, his arms tight around the Wadi's carapace. "Stay safe, kid," he murmured. "I'll be back before you know it." And then he was gone, striding out of the room and out of the academy, leaving a distraught Xiphus in his wake. Months passed, and the news from Earth grew ever grimmer. The Wadi invasion had been repelled, but at a staggering cost. Cities lay in ruins, entire swaths of the planet reduced to rubble and ash. The death toll was catastrophic, the list of the fallen stretching on and on. And still, there was no word from Russell. Xiphus clung to hope, even as it dwindled with each passing day. He threw himself into his studies, pushing himself harder than ever before. He would make Russell proud, he vowed. He would be the bridge between their worlds, the one to forge a lasting peace. And then one day a package arrived. It was small and unmarked, addressed to Xiphus in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. With trembling claws he opened it, his heart in his throat. Inside lay Russell's combat knife, its blade nicked and scarred from battle, and beneath it a simple note, the words smudged and blurred with tears. "You taught me what it means to be a true hero. I fought for your world as I would my own. I only hope I made you proud." Xiphus clutched the knife to his chest, his own tears falling freely as the weight of Russell's sacrifice crashed over him. He had given everything for a world that was not his own, for a people who had once been his enemies. And in that moment, Xiphus understood the true meaning of courage, of friendship, of the unbreakable bonds that could unite even the most disparate of souls. He looked to the stars, the knife heavy in his hand, and made a silent vow. He would carry on Russell's legacy. He would fight for peace, for understanding, for the dream of a universe where human and Wadi could stand side by side as brothers. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, just as Russell had taught him. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.